When a black mechanic showed up to fix a billionaire's private jet, people laughed, but no one expected what would happen next. Marcus Jennings pulled his old pickup truck up to the private runway at Westlake International Airport. From behind the glass of the VIP terminal, executives in expensive suits exchanged smirks and whispers as they watched the 38-year-old mechanic step out, toolbox in hand. "Is he the expert they sent for Mrs. Evans' jet?" scoffed Richard Hastings, operations director at Evans Aerospace. "I thought we asked for the best technician in the region, not someone who looks like he just came from a roadside garage." Marcus heard every word. He didn't react. He'd faced this kind of judgment before. What they didn't know was that those rough, scarred hands had repaired more luxury aircraft than anyone else at that airport. 15 years of experience, national awards, and a reputation built on skill, not appearance. A runway supervisor approached him cautiously. "Mrs. Evans' jet needs to be airborne in 2 hours. Our own team can't find the problem. If you can't fix it soon, we'll have to call the Atlanta crew." The Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming in the sunlight, a $65 million masterpiece. As Marcus walked toward it, he could feel the eyes on him, critical, doubtful, even mocking. But one pair stood out, sharp, curious, and confident. "Let him work," came a clear voice that silenced everyone. It was Alexandra Evans herself, 43 years old, CEO of Evans Aerospace, walking across the tarmac with authority. Her navy blue suit and perfectly styled hair spoke of precision and power. Ignoring her staff, she looked straight at Marcus. "How long will it take?" she asked. "That depends on the issue, ma'am," Marcus said calmly, meeting her gaze. "You've got 1 hour," Alexandra replied firmly. Alexandra glanced at her wristwatch, a timepiece worth more than Marcus earned in a year. "Impress me," she said simply. As the executives retreated back into the comfort of the air-conditioned lounge, Marcus got to work. The moment he opened the main access panel, he knew something was seriously wrong. What others had dismissed as a minor electrical fault was actually a major failure in the pressurization system. If that jet had taken off as it was, the cabin would have depressurized at 45,000 feet, and everyone on board would have died. Marcus worked quickly but calmly, his movements sharp and precise. Every tool, every turn of the wrench was deliberate. He wasn't just fixing a machine, he was quietly saving lives. Through the terminal window, Alexandra Evans watched him closely. Her gaze wasn't like the others, no arrogance, no doubt. It was focused, thoughtful, almost respectful. 30 minutes later, Marcus tightened the last bolt, closed the panel, and wiped his hands with a worn rag. The job was done. No applause. No handshake. Just another quiet victory that would likely go unnoticed, as it always did. Moments later, Alexandra stepped back onto the tarmac, this time alone. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked straight toward him, ignoring the puzzled looks from her team behind the glass. "How long would it have taken them to find the real problem?" she asked calmly. "They wouldn't have found it," Marcus replied without hesitation. "The jet would have gone down, with everyone on board, long before they figured it out," Marcus said quietly. The silence that followed was thick. Alexandra studied him with sharp, unsettling focus before finally speaking. "Come with me," she ordered. The executives froze. Richard Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his smug expression fading fast. No one knew it yet, but this wasn't just about a repaired jet, it was the start of something much bigger. A moment that would challenge deep-rooted prejudice and uncover truths the aviation world had buried for decades. Because the man they'd mocked, the one who just saved a $65 million aircraft, was the original designer of the very pressurization system that powered half of Evans Aerospace's fleet. The same system Richard Hastings had built his career and reputation on. If this story of injustice and redemption moves you, subscribe, because what happens next will show how a lifetime of quiet struggle can turn into triumph with a single act of recognition. As Alexandra and Marcus walked side by side toward the terminal, whispers filled the hangar. The executives watched, confused and uneasy, while Richard's face twisted in panic. He looked like a man whose secrets were seconds away from exposure. "My office." "Now," Alexandra said firmly. The walk was silent. Only the echo of their footsteps through the polished corridors broke the tension. When they entered her private office, the space reflected her perfectly. Modern, powerful, and precise. Alexandra closed the door, gestured toward a chair, and sat behind her sleek desk. "What's your full name?" she asked, eyes locked on him. "Marcus Jennings." Her fingers flew across her tablet. Then she froze. A flicker of realization crossed her face. "Marcus Jennings. MJ," she murmured, almost to herself. "Those are the initials on the original G7 pressurization blueprints." Marcus didn't react, but his grip on the armrest tightened. "You hold 3 patents," she continued softly. 4 innovation awards. A master's in aerospace engineering from the Technical University. And yet, here you are, working as a field mechanic. "Why?" Marcus replied without hesitation. "Because no one wants to put a black engineer from the suburbs in charge of a development team. And bills don't wait, Ms. Evans, so I fix jets." Alexandra's expression didn't change. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and laid several documents across her desk, all bearing Richard Hastings' signature as chief engineer on the G7 pressurization system. "Do you have any idea how much profit this system has generated for my company in the last 5 years?" she asked, flipping through the papers. "About $428 million, Marcus said calmly. "It reduced fuel consumption by 23% and maintenance costs by 31%. Alexandra looked up, momentarily taken aback by his precise answer. "Hastings received 3 promotions and a $2.5 million bonus for his innovation," she continued. "While I kept fixing jets," Marcus finished quietly, his voice steady, his face unreadable. A sharp knock interrupted the tension. Without waiting for permission, Richard Hastings walked in, his forced smile doing little to hide the panic in his eyes. "Alexandra, the board's waiting for you on the video call. We need to discuss." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Marcus sitting across from her. His tone hardened instantly. "What's he still doing here? The service is done, isn't it?" "Actually," Alexandra said coolly, "we were just discussing intellectual property. Specifically, the G7 system." The color drained from Richard's face. "I don't see what a mechanic could possibly contribute to that conversation," he scoffed. "That's interesting," Alexandra replied, tapping on her tablet. "Because I have the original G7 blueprints here, all marked with the initials MJ. And I just learned those belong to Marcus Jennings, who worked briefly in the development division 5 years ago." "This is ridiculous," Richard stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "He was an assistant technician, nothing more. The G7 system was developed entirely by my team." Just then, the door opened again. A poised woman in her 50s entered, carrying a large briefcase. Marcus recognized her instantly, Dr. Sophia Chun, the company's chief legal officer. "Apologies for the delay, Alexandra," she said, nodding politely before turning to Hastings with a cold, professional stare. "I reviewed the intellectual property files myself. The digital signature on the original G7 documents matches Mr. Jennings, not you." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. There must be some mistake," he stuttered. "He worked under me. Maybe he made a few small contributions." "Small?" Alexandra cut in sharply. "I have your emails to HR right here, recommending Marcus's termination for technical incompetence, exactly 3 days after he submitted the complete G7 design." Richard froze. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Marcus sat still, his composure steady. 5 years ago, he'd been escorted out of this building like a criminal, humiliated in front of his peers, his work stolen. He had promised himself the truth would come out someday. He just hadn't imagined it would happen like this. "Mr. Jennings," Alexandra said, breaking the silence, "Dr. Chun has prepared some documents for you to review. They include formal recognition of your authorship, financial compensation for unpaid royalties, and a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but cautious. "The kind that makes history," Alexandra said, turning to Richard, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Richard, you're temporarily relieved of your duties pending the results of an internal investigation," Alexandra said firmly. "Please hand your badge to security." Hastings froze, anger flashing across his face. "You can't do this. The board will never." "The board will be notified in an hour," Alexandra interrupted sharply. "If you care about your dignity, I suggest you walk out that door before I have security escort you." His jaw tightened. Without another word, he slammed the door behind him, the echo lingering in the room like a warning. Alexandra exhaled slowly and turned to Marcus and Dr. Chun. "Now," she said quietly, "we can actually get started." What unfolded over the next 2 hours would change not only Marcus's life, but the balance of power inside Evans Aerospace itself. As Sophia reviewed pages of legal documents, Marcus watched Alexandra closely. There was something deeper behind her determination, something beyond just righting a past wrong. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't driven only by fairness, but by purpose. Because Alexandra Evans was hiding a secret of her own. Inside her briefcase wasn't just proof of the stolen G7 designs. It held the results of a confidential 2-year internal investigation, one that documented a pattern of discrimination, credit theft, and quiet corruption at the highest levels of her company. Marcus Jennings wasn't the first victim. He was simply the one whose evidence was undeniable, the one who could expose everything. And Alexandra had been waiting, watching, preparing for the right moment to bring the entire system crashing down from within. Meanwhile, in the airport parking lot, Richard Hastings sat in his car, gripping his phone. His career, his empire, was slipping away. Desperation crept into his voice as he called board members one by one, rallying old alliances. He still had leverage, documents and deals that could not only ruin Marcus but also threaten Alexandra herself. What Richard didn't realize was that every call he made, every message he sent, was being quietly tracked. The walls were closing in. And the real battle was only just beginning. Alexandra Evans's private meeting room felt like another world, quiet, sleek, and far removed from the noise of the airport terminal below. Marcus shifted slightly in the leather chair as she closed the door behind them, sealing the room in silence. "The pressurization system you just repaired," Alexandra began, walking toward the table, "that's a modified version of the G7, isn't it?" Marcus kept his tone calm. "Yes, ma'am. The same G7 system Richard Hastings claimed to have designed, the one that earned him a 7-figure bonus." She slid a folder across the table. "And yet, the original blueprints show something interesting, the initials MJ." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them carried more weight than words. "5 years ago," Alexandra continued, her voice steady, "you were a junior engineer at Evans Aerospace. You were dismissed for technical incompetence 3 days after submitting a full design to the development team." Marcus nodded slightly. "I've got bills to pay," he said evenly. "Mechanics pay theirs too." Alexandra leaned forward, her gaze sharp but sympathetic. "You know what else I discovered, Mr. Jennings? You weren't the only one. In the past decade, 7 gifted employees were terminated under nearly identical circumstances. All black or Latino, all let go soon after submitting major innovations." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened. A composed woman in her 50s stepped in, carrying a tablet and an air of quiet authority. "Apologies for the delay," she said. "Marcus, this is Dr. Vanessa Chun, our new general counsel." Vanessa offered a firm nod. "Mr. Jennings, my team has spent the last 8 months investigating internal misconduct," she explained. "And we now have solid evidence of widespread intellectual property theft inside Evans Aerospace." "Your case," Alexandra said quietly, "is just the tip of the iceberg." Marcus leaned back, memories flashing through his mind like a storm, late nights in the lab, the thrill of cracking the pressurization issue no one else could solve, the look on Hastings's face when he saw the results, and then, the humiliation of being escorted out of the building as if he were a criminal. "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked finally. "Because I need your help," Alexandra replied. "Richard Hastings still controls half the board. He's protected by people with power, people who will fight to keep things buried. I need solid, undeniable proof to take him down." Marcus looked at her, skeptical. "And what's in it for me?" "Recognition," she said firmly. "Full financial compensation for the royalties you were denied. And," she hesitated, "the position of Director of Innovation, the one that should have been yours 5 years ago." Marcus gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You really think the board's going to accept a black mechanic as a director?" For the first time, Alexandra smiled. "They won't have a choice, not once they understand what's at stake." I grew up fixing broken electronics in the poorest part of town, Marcus said softly. I learned early that people like me need insurance against people like him. What Alexandra Evans didn't know was that Marcus had collected far more than evidence of his own injustice. Over 5 long years, while working as a quiet, overlooked mechanic, he had catalogued every stolen patent, every idea erased, every career destroyed by prejudice. His modest appearance had been his perfect disguise. While he repaired the jets of billionaires, he had been quietly gathering the fuel to burn down an entire corrupt system. Richard Hastings thought he was dealing with a humiliated man. He was wrong. He was facing an engineer-turned-strategist, a man who had turned 5 years of invisibility into the perfect weapon. 6 months later, the world looked very different. Evans Aerospace's top floor, once a fortress of privilege, now reflected the diversity Alexandra had promised. And at its center stood Marcus Jennings, no longer the forgotten mechanic, but the director of technological innovation, leading the division that had created the G7 system. The extraordinary shareholders' meeting held months earlier had become a defining moment in American corporate history. Before a packed auditorium, Alexandra Evans, flanked by Dr. Vanessa Chun, presented irrefutable evidence, documents, testimonies, and, finally, the recording that would end Richard Hastings' career forever. Hastings' voice filled the hall through the loudspeakers, dripping with arrogance and contempt. "We need to get rid of this pretentious mechanic." His words rang out, cold and unmistakable. Take ownership of the system. Erase any trace of her authorship. Who would believe that a black woman from the suburbs created something this sophisticated? Our customers trust us, not people like her. The room froze. A long, stunned silence, and then a wave of outrage rolled through the crowd like thunder. Within hours, Evans Aerospace's stock had fallen 18%, but something far more important had risen in its place: accountability. In his first major interview with Aviation Technology magazine, Marcus Jennings was calm, reflective, and unapologetic. "I could have sued individually," he said. But this wasn't just about Richard Hastings. It was about a system, one that rewarded theft and punished innovation when it came from people who didn't fit the mold. The solution that Marcus proposed, and that Alexandra Evans fully endorsed, was nothing short of revolutionary. Together, they launched a corporate restitution program to identify and compensate every employee whose intellectual property had been stolen over the past decade. But they didn't stop there. They created the Evans Aerospace Innovation Fund, dedicated to empowering engineers, inventors, and creators from historically marginalized communities. For the first time, talent and integrity became the company's new currency. Meanwhile, Richard Hastings' downfall was swift and merciless. Multiple lawsuits followed. His professional licenses were revoked. The man who once mocked Marcus on the tarmac now couldn't find work even as a third-rate consultant. Months later, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Evans Aerospace-funded Community Technology Development Center, Marcus stood beside Alexandra, looking out at the crowd, young faces filled with the same hunger he'd once had. "Revenge was never my goal," Marcus said quietly. "Justice was. Visibility was." The center stood proudly in the same neighborhood where Marcus had once repaired radios in a cramped garage. Now, it offered free advanced technical training, mentorship, and innovation labs for youth who had no access to formal education. Alexandra smiled, watching the new generation file in. "You turned pain into purpose, Marcus." He nodded. "No. We did." The camera panned outward, the sign above the center gleaming in the morning sun. The Marcus Jennings Innovation Lab. A new era had begun, not built on privilege, but on the simple, unbreakable truth that genius knows no color and innovation needs no permission. Under Marcus Jennings' leadership, 3 groundbreaking patents had already come out of the new training program. One afternoon, as they watched a group of teenagers testing a small prototype, Alexandra Evans smiled faintly. "You know what's ironic?" she asked. "If Hastings had just shared the credit with you, he'd probably still be director. But greed blinds people. It makes them underestimate everyone else's potential." Marcus nodded quietly. He'd learned that truth the hard way. But the biggest surprise came 3 months after his official appointment. Alexandra called him into her office, not with another promotion, but with a proposal. "I thought she'd lost her mind," Marcus later said on Good Morning America. "It wasn't marriage, as the tabloids love to assume, it was a business merger. Alexandra wanted to combine his small independent engineering firm, the same one he had kept running out of his garage during those hard 5 years, with Evans Aerospace itself. Today, that small garage startup owned 30% of the company. The same executives who had once laughed at Marcus on the runway were no longer laughing. Some had quietly resigned, unable to work under Alexandra's leadership. Others stayed, learning, often uncomfortably, that talent and excellence have no color. A year later, Alexandra hosted a special event, the launch of a new propulsion system developed by Marcus's team, capable of cutting commercial fuel use by 40%. As cameras flashed and employees gathered, Alexandra took the stage. "A year ago," she began, "many of you watched as a black man was mocked, even while saving lives. Today, that same man is saving our industry, our planet, and most importantly, he's saving the dreams that prejudice once tried to silence." The applause was thunderous. Marcus scanned the audience. Faces that had once looked down on him now stood clapping. He didn't feel pride in them, not exactly. He knew some were cheering to protect their image, not because they'd truly changed. But then he looked past them, at the young engineers from every background now filling roles that had once been out of reach. That was what mattered. In the front row sat his mother, Mrs. Jennings, 72 years old. She had spent her life cleaning corporate offices so her son could one day work in one. Now, she sat watching him at the podium, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus took a deep breath before his final words. "Real change doesn't happen when someone like me breaks through the barriers and makes it. It happens when we open those doors wide enough for everyone to walk through. When talent isn't dismissed because of bias or background. True justice isn't individual. It's structural." The crowd rose again, this time, not out of obligation, but out of respect. And for the first time, Marcus felt something deeper than victory. He felt peace. The story of the mechanic who became co-owner of an aerospace empire didn't just make headlines. It ignited a movement. Across the country, young engineers from marginalized communities began to believe again. Dr. Chun opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a confidentiality agreement," she explained. "Anything discussed here stays between us until we move forward." Before Marcus could read it, there was a sharp knock at the door. It swung open without permission. Richard Hastings stepped in, wearing an expression of fake concern. "Alexandra, the board is waiting for you. And why is this contract employee still here?" "We were discussing the G7 system," Alexandra said calmly, her tone giving nothing away. Richard's face paled slightly. "I don't see what a mechanic could possibly add to a technical discussion on advanced engineering." "Fascinating," Alexandra replied, picking up her tablet. "Because these are the original G7 schematics, all signed with the initials MJ. Richard forced a laugh. "Oh, please. He was just an assistant technician. Maybe he contributed a few small details. Minor." Alexandra cut in sharply. "I have your own emails here recommending Mr. Jennings's dismissal for technical incompetence 3 days after he submitted this complete design." For a split second, Richard froze, then forced a smile. "Alexandra, we have an important board meeting. We can't waste time on conspiracy theories." But Alexandra was already standing. Her voice was firm, controlled. "Richard Hastings, you are temporarily suspended pending the results of an internal investigation. Hand over your badge to security." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Alexandra's eyes told him it was useless. Alexandra Evans' private meeting room felt like a world apart from the chaos of the airport outside. Marcus sat stiffly in a leather chair as she closed the door behind them, sealing the noise of the terminal away. "The pressurization system you repaired," Alexandra began, her voice cool but precise. "It's a modified version of the G7, isn't it?" Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am." She slid a folder across the table. "A system that Richard Hastings claims he designed, the one that earned him a 7-figure bonus. But here's the interesting part, Marcus. The original blueprints are signed with the initials MJ." A heavy silence filled the room. "5 years ago," Alexandra continued, "you were a junior engineer at Evans Aerospace. You were fired for technical incompetence just 3 days after submitting a complete design to the development department." Marcus leaned back, his tone calm but edged. "I had bills to pay." "So do mechanics," Alexandra replied sharply. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You know what else I found, Mr. Jennings? You weren't the only one. Over the past 10 years, 7 talented employees were fired under the same circumstances, all black or Latino, all dismissed shortly after submitting major innovations." The door opened quietly. A middle-aged woman entered carrying a tablet. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "Marcus, this is Dr. Vanessa Chun, our new general counsel," Alexandra introduced. "She's been leading a private investigation for the past 8 months. Vanessa nodded politely. "Mr. Jennings, we have strong evidence of systematic intellectual property theft within Evans Aerospace. And your case is just the tip of the iceberg." Marcus' eyes flickered with memory, late nights alone in the lab, the thrill of solving the unsolvable pressurization problem, the cold look on Hastings' face when he saw the results, and the humiliation of being escorted out like a criminal. He looked up. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need your help," Alexandra said. "Richard Hastings controls half the board, and he has powerful allies. I need irrefutable proof to take him down." Marcus folded his arms. "And what's in it for me?" "Recognition. Full financial compensation for your design royalties." She paused. "And the position that should have been yours 5 years ago, Director of Innovation." Marcus let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You really think the board would accept a black mechanic as director?" For the first time, Alexandra smiled. "They won't have a choice once they see what's at stake." Dr. Chun slid a document toward him. "This is a confidentiality agreement. Anything we discuss—" A loud knock interrupted her. The door burst open. Richard Hastings entered without waiting for permission, his face wearing a mask of false concern. "Alexandra, the board is waiting," he said coldly. "And why is this contract employee still here?" "We were discussing the G7 system," Alexandra replied, calm and collected. Hastings' face paled almost imperceptibly. "I don't understand what a mechanic could contribute to advanced engineering." Alexandra turned her tablet toward him. "Fascinating, isn't it? These are the original schematics, initialed MJ." "Ha!" Hastings forced a laugh. "Any minor contribution?" "Minor?" Alexandra interrupted sharply. "I have emails from you, recommending Mr. Jennings' dismissal for incompetence 3 days after he submitted this design." Hastings' mask slipped, but he quickly recovered. "Alexandra, we have a video conference. The board won't wait while you entertain conspiracy theories." She stood. "You are temporarily suspended pending the outcome of our internal investigation." "You can't do that," he snapped. "The board would never." "The board will be informed in an hour," Alexandra cut him off. "I suggest you leave with some dignity." When the door slammed shut, she turned back to Marcus. "We have 2 weeks until the general shareholders' meeting," she said. "We need solid proof by then." Marcus leaned forward. "I have something better." Her brows lifted. "I still have the original G7 prototype, complete with development records, all dated and digitally signed." "And recordings." "Recordings?" Alexandra echoed, stunned. Marcus smiled faintly. "Recordings from 5 years ago, Hastings explaining, in his own words, how to erase my contribution from company records. How to discredit me." Dr. Chun looked impressed. "How did you manage that?" Programs modeled after Marcus Jennings' initiative sprang up in other corporations. Some driven by social pressure, others by the undeniable truth that diversity isn't charity, it's strength. Evans Aerospace, once a symbol of exclusion, became the model of what happens when equality becomes practice, not just policy. Success didn't erase the scars Marcus carried, the humiliations, the rejections, the years of invisibility. But it gave him something greater than vindication. A platform to turn pain into purpose. Each morning, as he walked through the community tech center bearing his name, he saw rows of young students, eyes bright, hands steady, hearts unafraid. And in those faces, Marcus saw the reason for everything. Not his wealth, not his title, but their freedom. freedom from the doubt and prejudice that had once shadowed his own dreams. Because the greatest victory was never his success. It was the path he left behind, clear, wide, and waiting for those who would come after him. The best answer to prejudice, Marcus often said, is not to rise above it alone, but to tear down the walls so no one else ever has to climb so high. Just to be treated fairly. So if this story of discrimination turned into collective triumph has touched your heart, subscribe now, and join us in sharing stories that remind the world of one unshakable truth. Sparkle's dignity isn't given. It's built, and once built, it lifts everyone. Sparkles.